I saw this one question on Slack where someone was like, hey, how much should I invest in, how much should I budget for sales training? And someone literally answered, figure out what technologies you want and then just build a budget around that. And I'm like, that's a really good way to have no ROI. Each question is so good.
Hey everyone, welcome to yet another episode of Sales Gambit. I'm your host Ashish, CEO of Convin, a conversation intelligence platform for the sales team. In today's episode, we'll be talking about how to maximize your sales training ROI. And for that, we have Meghann Misiak, a founder of the Path to President's Club. She's on a mission to help sellers accomplish their dreams and is dedicated to assisting them in finding meaning in sales. Meghann has an extensive career in sales. She has served as a sales coach at Sales Killer and sales training manager at Movable Inc. and NewsCred and a member of Rev Genius community. Welcome to Sales Gambit, Meghann.
Thanks, great to be here.
Great. So Meghann, starting with the basics, right? I think, can you tell us a little bit about how your sales journey has been so far and what are you working on currently? How did you get into sales? That'd be great for us to know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly have been selling since I was 16 years old. So I started in retail just as an after-school job, but really fell in love with it. I went to college and worked part-time as a leasing agent to pay the bills and pay for books. And after school, I had a sociology degree, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. So I stuck to what I loved and what I knew. I worked a really crappy job, which was commission only. Props out there to anyone who has worked a commission only role. It is brutal. And I really didn't have any training. So I got into SaaS sales. And as a seller, I just saw so many people around me failing. And even the people who were succeeding didn't really understand why they were succeeding. It wasn't like I could ask them, what's the formula for success? And the question, like the feedback I kept getting was, I don't know, I just tried a bunch of things. And after 10 years, I learned. But being someone who's super aggressive, who didn't want to wait 10 years to be successful, I made a deal with my boss, which he would pay for me to go to sales training and I would bring it back to the company. So my first kind of like player coach enablement role was also born. And, good for him. I actually went to President's Club the first year I invested in my own sales training. The bad thing for him is that I fell in love with the training element. So I moved to New York and I was interviewing for sales roles and started, I actually had one company that was like, listen, we like your sales experience, but we love your training experience. And for the past 6 years, I've been in leading enablement teams. So focusing on everything from building onboarding programs, bringing on sales technologies for coaching and efficiency, and also just training and guiding the strategy of the teams. For the last year, I've actually gone out on my own and I actually help a lot of companies bring a lot of those things and even just strategy, guidance, execution for sales training to the market. So it's really exciting because I feel like there's a lot more sales trainers and a lot more sales training programs than when I started in this career. So good choice.
Definitely. Very interesting, right? It's not sales by accident. You have done sales by choice, right? All the time. It's good to meet people, who are so aware about the choices they make. Great. So let's get to today's topic probably. So what I understand, with my own understanding, Meghann, is that companies pay a hefty amount today to train their sales force, right?
Yeah.
And obviously it is worthwhile, the investment for team success, but want to deep dive into maximizing the ROI on the sales training dollars, right? So let's start with a very basic question. So in your opinion, is sales training a must to have or a good to have? And why would you say that?
I love this question because honestly, a lot of my sales training experience was actually being hired on the heels of an external trainer. Okay. So a lot of times it happened several times where a company had invested in sales training. And I mean, I'm talking like $100, even up to $150,000 in like a week-long training. And they weren't seeing results. No one was using it. There was no ROI.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, coming in and being given this training, being like, hey, can you work with this? Can you figure out how to actually make this work? A key trend I see happening in the field is that people are investing less in one-time training events, and they're investing more in internal enablement teams, and just like, again, regular coaching. And so when we ask the question of like, is it a must to have or a good to have? I think it depends. And I think a lot of times our approach to sales training has just been to like throw things at the wall and hope that it works. But when we think about, what are those elements that we need to think about before we invest in sales training, there's a lot. One, what are your goals, right? Because I think a lot of times people don't know what they're looking for. And so they just, a lot of people come to me, and I personally don't only do sales training. I usually engage with clients for 3 to 6 months, if not a year, and really pair it with, coaching, even customization. We actually do we build scorecards and frameworks and things like that before we ever do training. And so I think from that perspective, we need to think about what are your goals for the training. Whether is it to, onboard someone. Onboarding is best done by an internal person, right? Is it to, grow revenue? Is it to just, I will say sometimes it's just to excite sellers about selling, right? And so from that perspective, something like a one-time training event at a sales kickoff can be really exciting. So I think that's the thing, is a lot of times we just group in like sales training, and we don't necessarily ask, what are we trying to achieve? What is the best format for that? Simply because a lot of people are used to training in terms of like a one-time event at a sales kickoff. So that I want to challenge everyone to even expand your thinking on this and realize that this field and the definition of sales training is changing a lot. And so before you invest in, something because you think it's the right thing to do, really look at your options and think through what you're trying to achieve.
Question here, Meghann, right? You mentioned that sales training is changing, right? And the definition is changing, right? Let's talk about SaaS companies in general, right? SaaS companies are doing medium touch or a low touch sales, between, let's say, low touch to medium touch sales, right? Having an inside sales team or something like that today, which is the most prevalent scenario today. What should sales training mean for them?
I love that question. I have always thought of it in 3 different buckets.
Okay.
I think of it as onboarding. So how are you, and when I say onboarding, I mean for both new hires as well as newly promoted hires. So I know a lot of teams, I always tell sales managers that BDRs are a little bit like puppies. When you get a puppy and you're so excited, you're like, great, like, oh, I can't wait. We're going to snuggle all the time. And then you realize like they're going to grow up very quickly. And a lot of people are not prepared for, in a year when your BDR is getting a little antsy. A BDR role is one of the hardest, right? It requires a lot of grit, a lot of hearing no constantly. And also, it's not most of the time a stagnant role. People want to grow into an account executive. Most teams have no way of growing BDRs into account executives. They also, a lot of times, don't have a way of growing, whether it's mid-market or growing account executives into enterprise account executives. So, onboarding is the first one. And a lot of times people focus on product training. And then we wonder why salespeople are so product focused, because that's the only training that they get, right? It's also ongoing training. So that is sales skills, even just making sure we're embodying the values of the organization. It's constant tweaking and making sure people are constantly improving. And then there's a third bucket, which is very custom to every organization, which is company-wide initiatives, right? That could include whether you're launching new products. It could include maybe you're pivoting from focusing on new business to upsell, and very specific things that are not just general sales skills and improving overall, but really shifting the strategy of the organization and using training and enablement to support those initiatives.
Got it. So if I have to summarize my understanding, you're saying 3 things. One is onboarding the representatives. Second is giving them the product training and the ongoing ongoing trainings. And the third would be look at the business goals and then decide what strategy you want to follow for that business goal, and what is the training and enablement that you need for that to happen, or for to achieve those goals. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is it possible, I'm again, I might be deviating a little bit, but this topic is very close
Mhm.
to personally to me, so wanted to understand properly on, do you feel that it's sort of possible for a company in a growing stage to focus on all these three simultaneously, or they should just pick one of their battles and focus on that first?
That's an amazing question. And I'll be very honest, even I, as an internal sales trainer, did not focus on all three at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times I like literally every single quarter, I would go to my chief revenue officer and even my chief financial officer, and we would align on how much, like literally what percentage of my time I was going to spend on each initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think this is a lot of times what sales trainers and enablement folks don't do, because they're a lot of times like they're not connected enough to those companies, to the initiatives, or they're so focused on, things in their world, right? They're not tying what they're doing to initiatives that are at the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
And so what if you actually do, and by the way, a really easy way to do that, I actually, like when I went into the role, my last role, I really like my bonus every quarter was actually focused on achieving, like we would set goals for myself every quarter, and then I would have to review them with the CFO. It took a long time for me to do that, but it was incredible because I literally had them tell me what are we working on together, and it really brought together what I was working on and with what they wanted. It was everything from, hey, we have a new launch, we have a new product launch. So what are we going to do for the training? How are we going to measure this success? Are we going to certify people? How do we make sure that we actually are feeding all of the feedback from I know we're going to talk about sales tech, like how are we actually setting up Gong to make sure we can track the conversations, give feedback back to the product and marketing teams, all of these things. And a lot of times, just those high level conversations don't happen. So that's where a lot of times the disconnect between training initiatives and the real hard goals of the organization happen. From an external sense, also, a lot of times you would be so surprised that when I go to teams or when they come to me and they're like, hey, we want to do training. I'm like, okay, well, what are your goals? And I've literally had clients tell me, no one else has asked us that. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, so you're a sales trainer and you're not asking them what their goals are. Yeah. It's just completely crazy to me. But I think a lot of sales trainers have gotten so comfortable with being like, hey, here's what the training is. It's standard, it's packaged, it's ready to go. I just fly in, show up, do the same training I always do, and then good luck with it, right? Got it. So I think that there's a lot of things that we need to think about in terms of, what's realistic for teams. But I think every single quarter, even like for example, what you mentioned about like, is it realistic for people to focus on all three of those? No, they shouldn't be. A lot of times I find that people are focusing on too much at a time, and people don't even have the time to let things sink in before someone rolls out the next thing. And it's just really overwhelming for people. It's also not how people actually learn or retain information. Got it. Makes sense. If I think about, what you have just said, right, on how important it is to have goals in mind, right? And goals would be really aligned to what kind of people you are training, right? Yeah. New hires, seasoned sales professional. Obviously, the goals should be for business side as well, but these goals should also be very important type of audiences that you are training, right? So, is it essential for just the new hires, or even the seasoned sales professional need sales training? I love this question because when I go into sales training, we always have two groups of individuals. Okay. We have the skeptics and the believers. Okay. The skeptics are the people who are rolling their eyes in the training, saying, I don't need this. This doesn't apply to me. This trainer is so dumb. This trainer doesn't know more than I do. I'm not going to listen to any of this.
Uh-huh.
And the believers, they're ones that are like sitting there like, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. I'm being invested in. Wow. Like, they're giving you. And I think so many times it's easy for trainers to just focus on the people who are excited about it.
Mhm.
But I would really challenge that thinking.
Okay.
So when I go into clients, I actually, even when we do a pilot, because I'm all of my training is very custom. So when we're building a scorecard, I literally say, hey, this is going to be a little bit tricky, but I want to figure out who represents someone who might be skeptical, and how can we bring that person into the pilot so that we can raise questions. Because a lot of times if we're only focusing on a lot of times like the new people, or like we need to have a lot of diversity in terms of the approach we're taking. It's skeptics, and it's both more senior people, it's more junior people. I also think there's an interesting aspect of who's newer to the organization and who's been in the role or been in the company for a long time, right? And so all of those perspectives need to be addressed. And in one training, it's hard to do that. So I do think that, breakouts that are role specific, breakouts that are also just that cover different segments, right? Even, for example, you can do different breakouts for people who focus on different verticals. Even if you're in certain geo markets, like in the US, people who have the Northeast territory, it's a lot of financial services, right? Yeah. So really thinking about the different segments of the team, skepticism, experience level, even just role level, the market that they're in, the type of clients they address, whether it's, enterprise or mid-market or financial services or higher education, all of those things should be addressed and really customized to avoid what I call eye roll moments, where people are like, they're rolling their eyes and they're not paying attention because they don't think it applies to them. It's not interesting to them, and they're not going to listen, and they're definitely not going to adopt it.
Fair point. No, I totally agree with that part. That some people might not believe it, but then you really need to get those people also involved overall, so you can probably showcase the value on the training side of it. I have a very small question around the same thing. That let's say enterprise companies generally have a budget, right, for training. They are invested. They have it the hard way. They have been in the whole market for this long period in time, and they understand how important is sales training, right? But do you feel that the businesses and startups should also consider sales training programs as a must to have, given that they are in initial stage, they might not have a decided budget around it? So what did you suggest for a young business or a startup?
These questions are just so good. I actually work with two different partners, and I have two very different training offerings. So the majority of my work is with those larger organizations, and a lot of it is just why, right? Like the frameworks that I use, I focus primarily on deal qualification and creating custom scorecards for enterprise deals. And a lot of that requires, like, I always tell people, like, the easiest way is to get your Salesforce team. So usually these teams have an ops team, right? They have Salesforce. They have like 3 to 4 people that are dedicated just to building things in Salesforce and maintaining it. And so a lot of times, like, my clients are pre-IPO, or they've just been through a round of funding. They want to mature their processes, and that's a very different approach, right? Even the teams that I work with are typically for anywhere from 50 to 200 salespeople. Very different. However, one of my partners, which is he's fantastic. His name is Scott Sambucci from Sales Qualia. We mentioned earlier, I'm one of their sales coaches. He also has a prospecting coach. And he works with a lot smaller clients. He actually he wrote a book called Stop Hustling and Start Scaling. And it's more for startups. So a lot of times the clients are, they have like 1 to 2 salespeople, or they don't even have salespeople, and it's the founder selling. It is a very different market, right? It's a very different mindset. It's a lot about, establishing your first sales process, documenting those things. There's a lot that goes into that. And I think a lot of times enterprise is just so specialized. And then when you think about working with smaller clients, startups, et cetera, you're probably not going to benefit as much from something that is so specialized, from one training. And so I think it's very different. And that's why, like, you see how, one person focusing with a team that has like like 3 or 4 teams that are basically just implementing everything I tell them.
Yeah.
Or if you're a startup, you're going to benefit from like working, one contract, one relationship that has 3 to 4 specialists all helping you with the entire client library. There's implementation specialists, from a more generalist perspective.
So
and that's the beauty is like, there's so many different types of trainers out there today.
So would you suggest startups to sort of focus on sales training, or you tell them that, hey, you don't worry about sales training initially, but when you become a enterprise client, only then move to sales training? What is your suggestion around that?
Yeah. Well, I think we should expand our view of sales training. So, I think when people think of sales training, they think of more what I do for most of my clients, which is, coming in, serving as a consultant, working on one specific narrow project. Hey,
Okay.
we're going to focus on implementing a deal qualification framework for you, right?
Okay.
Start to finish, this is the project.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's really valuable for startups is more of a coaching program where you work with someone who specializes in that market and who can actually guide you through everything from, hey, how do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
The next day, something totally different. How do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Then the third day, it's like, hey, I have comp plans coming up. Can you help guide me on how to set up my first sales comp plan?
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot more valuable for startups. And I think a lot of the times people are looking for when they say, I need sales training. So I definitely recommend more of a general. That's why I think the coaching is really valuable from someone who's done it before, or like Sales Qualia, who they bring together 3 to 4 coaches as additional implementation specialists. And I'm their mid-market, or sorry, not mid-market, mid-funnel specialist. So anything from discovery through negotiation. They have an entirely different trainer we actually have every other week. We both have office hours. We lead a call just to go over, like, I do a deal call where bring me all of your deal count. He has prospecting calls where it's like, bring me the emails you're writing. Like, we're literally going to dive in. And so again, having the approach where it's not so specialized is a lot more valuable for startups and for people who, startups move so quickly, your needs change every single day.
Got it. Makes sense. And this completely makes sense. So what you're saying is that on the startup side, it should be more on the generalist approach, right? Rather than being very specific about a topic and looking into that as a training. Got it. With the new tools, right? With the advent of technology, and you would already be aware that a lot of new tools have come into the market, including sales ops, sales training, coaching, a lot of them. Do you feel that sales training has become easier or more difficult? How would you put that out?
Both. So I kind of compare this to the rise of marketing automation about 5 years ago, 5 years ago probably, where it was like, wow, we're finally going to be able to automate all of these things. It's going to get so much easier and we're going to have so much more ROI. Yeah. And then the reality hits. Where a lot of teams are just invested in, like, I see a lot of times I'm a member of a few Slack channels, and people I think they're replacing sales training with sales technology. And let's go into the pros and the cons. The pro is that you mentioned coaching and the importance of it, right? I do think that, like, just like, unless templates, usually the templates are hard to find, or like they're sent in an email that gets lost. So the rise of sales technology can dramatically increase the ROI of sales training. Because, for example, when I do deal qualification, I also provide Gong scorecards. You can literally, so again, like, once I leave, even like when we work together, we actually do call reviews where we listen to a call in Gong and then score it with the new scorecard. So it definitely really helps with follow-up training and actually making sure that you can get the most ROI from training. However, it does not replace training. And most of the time, it definitely does not replace the sales trainer, because what I've seen as the worrisome, frustrating trend is very similar to marketing automation. These tools they're not just plug and play. They still need someone to run them, to customize them, to optimize them, and to actually make sure that that teams are utilizing them, So I think we're in that stage where it's very similar again, like to the marketing automation, where like people invested so much and are investing so much in sales technology. They're still figuring out how to use it. And I will say a lot of times when people are like, I saw this one question on Slack where someone was like, hey, how much should I invest in, or how much should I budget for sales training? And someone literally answered, figure out what technologies you want and then just build the budget around that. And I'm like, that's a really good way to have no ROI. If you like are just investing in technology and not training.
Makes sense. So you mean that the technology has made training easier, but you still need a proper plan and someone to lead that training to that place, right, where it gives you the ROI.
Yeah,
Is
absolutely. Yeah.
Got it. How important is it in the whole process of training, right? Usually what people, and I have seen companies do, is they want to train their end agents, end representatives who are talking to customers directly. But how important in your view it is to enable and train frontline sales managers, people who are leading these small teams?
Each question is so good. I don't think I've ever gotten this question, and it's such an important one because so many times I'm there. People are just like, you're the sales trainer, you need to fix this. And I'm like, I'm one person. And most people, like, again, those skeptics are not coming to me every day, right? So I do think that I actually, when I go into my proposal for my consulting contracts, I even have an entire slide dedicated to what could go wrong. Like what goes wrong with sales training in a project like this. And one of the very first ones is buy-in, where if people are not bought in, like I'm one person, not everyone is going to trust me, like my style. I also like, I'm not going to, another one is like adoption, follow through, accountability. All of those things of what could go wrong can be actually fixed and supported by sales managers. If they are bought in, if they are actually, helping the sales people implement this, if they are holding reps accountable to doing the things, then the ROI dramatically increases. And a lot of times this is the challenge where sales managers have the same reaction to sales training as the reps, where they have the eye roll moments where they're like, this is dumb, I'm not going to do this. Or even if they're similar to the salespeople who are like, wow, this is really cool. Sales managers are really busy. So unless we make it very easy for them and really bring them in and ask them like, hey, what do you need to make this training really effective? So an easy example is as I'm building a scorecard for a client right now, leading into a February training, and we've gotten the managers very involved. They took the first pass on building the scorecard with us, and then we tested it with their reps. And we did the final review of the scorecards last week, and the manager was like, hey, this is so good, but I'm already like 5 steps ahead. Like, is this going to be in Salesforce? And we're in like one part of it. And so we're like, hey, we know that you actually have another sales technology for taking notes. So we were kind of wondering if we should just use that. And the sales manager was like, listen, I've used this before, and like, I really think that we need it in Salesforce. So can we just explore doing that and maybe having both, having it in Salesforce and this other system? And just getting that feedback from the sales manager shows that he's invested, he's bought in, and also he's has an opportunity to tell us what he needs to be bought in and what his team needs from the training to actually make sure it's adopted and retained and utilized. So, those conversations take longer. I think a lot of enablement people, like, they have their own eye roll moments where they're like, oh, the more people I involve, the more time it's going to take. But it is so crucial to make sure that it's not just the training that happens. Like, it's really easy to get training out quickly, but to make sure it lasts, you actually should slow down a little bit and make sure it's done right. And that definitely starts with involving sales managers and making sure that they are invested.
Yeah, I mean, you can treat sales managers like champions, right? Who kind of
absolutely
that your training is really being adopted by people at the end of the whole cycle, right? Who are really doing the sales.
And one final thing on that is that I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we have that. I mean, even sales training, the budgets are increasing.
Yeah.
But almost like 95, probably higher than 95% of it is for individual reps. Most of the time, sales managers receive zero training. They walk in one day as a sales rep, top performing, and they're like, hey, you got a promotion. They walk in the next day as a sales manager and they're like, hey, here's access to some new Salesforce reports, and that's it. They maybe get like a few calendar invites.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen so many sales managers struggle and then a lot of times fail as managers because we assume that what it takes to be an individual contributor is the same as it takes to be a sales manager. You're just managing 5 or 6 or 10 territories instead of one, and it's very different. So, I took my last response really about like how sales managers can help increase the ROI, but we also need manager specific training to support initiatives around developing team, managing team. I think that what I would like to see more of in 2022 and beyond, as these budgets expand and these enablement teams expand, is more allocation of management, of like resources for management training specifically.
Makes sense. And though I understand, Meghann, that all of these training programs will have the ROIs basis the business goals that they have to, and what was the goal of the whole program that you started with. But in general, if I have to understand from an organization point of view, what are the some success matrices of a training program? Some generalized success metrics. If you can put that out, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it really depends on like, is each one of those buckets, right? So in terms of onboarding metrics, it's everything from, in terms of like quota attainment within the first year or the first 6 months. It can be the ramp time, how long it take people to get to proficiency. And you can define proficiency in different ways. It can be anything from, I've measured it anything like, okay, time to first deal to time to third deal. So there's some consistency, or time to first, the first quarter that they attain quota. It can also just be overall, like, I mean, there's so many different ways. And that's actually the challenging part sometimes, because whereas a lot of times in just sales, SaaS sales, especially in general, there are some agreed upon metrics that are like easy to calculate within, because sales enablement and sales training are still a pretty new, I would say like pretty new aspect of sales, or that's being more consistently invested in. It's not as standardized, and a lot of people just aren't tracking these things properly, or regularly, or at all. So from an ongoing perspective, I really like creating scorecards for, whether it's onboarding reps or also new ongoing, where some of the things we track are, of course, what are your close rate? What is your run rate? What the things I also really like tracking are actually giving people the metrics that they need to get promoted. What are kind of like, not saying even just be eligible for promotion, but even using metrics proactively and saying, hey, like, in order to be eligible for promotion, like, all of these things, is like, hey, the team's averages are right here. You need to be here, to really get people motivated to improve. And then the third bucket, company-wide initiatives, is going to be very dependent. So I think that's probably a trend right now where people may not be tracking metrics, but one really cool way to work with sales trainers, and like, I think a lot of times sales trainers are like, oh, you're not tracking metrics, it's fine. But, I would love to see even more sales trainers giving guidance on what metrics to track and how to track them, and even establishing, like, working with clients to track metrics for the very first time.
Makes sense. Around the end, I have a very small question, very important one.
Yeah.
Do you have any reading recommendations for our audiences who really want to build a sales training program, right? Any kind of reading recommendations around that?
Yeah. So I'll give one that I really love. I'll give one that I read in the last year and I absolutely loved, which was Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's a classic one. It's on negotiation, and I get really bored by sales books a lot of times. It's not boring at all. There's a lot of hostage negotiation stories. He was the former head of international hostage negotiations for the FBI. Incredible. Also another one for individuals that are looking to even just have really explore how to crush your goals in 2022, but in a very sustainable, way that is very balanced. I'm reading The Art of Impossible by Steven Kotler, and it focuses on actually like pro and extreme athletes. And for him, it even incorporates a lot of, okay, like how do you include rest in your strategy, right? So 2 books, absolutely incredible. And if you read those 2 this year, you'll be pretty good.
That's great. So Meghann, that's all the questions I had for you today. Thank you so much for coming to Sales Gambit and sharing such valuable insights with us. I mean, a lot of time, you generally get to just talk to people who can tell you theory, but the kind of practical experience that you have shared with our audience, that's really terrific. Really great to have you.
Thank you. Such incredible questions. And honestly, these are the questions that we really need to be talking about in this field, especially as there's more budgets. A lot of teams are investing in sales training and enablement for the very first time. So thank you for letting me share my experience.
Sure. This is your host, Ashish Santhalia, signing off. See you next week with a brand new episode of Sales Gambit. Happy selling, guys.